Story time why you should never ever lend money to anyone ever, but especially not family. Stories about my ex-in-laws, and I'm not sharing it to blow up their spot, but more so that I have 3 kids of my own that I'm raising to be a lot more financially savvy than I was at their age, or the age that my ex-in-laws were when they guilted us into lending them thousands of dollars. I was left with so much financial trauma from this whole situation that it altered my brain chemistry and changed the way I approach money for the better. Let me set the scene. I was about 24 or 25 at the time. We had just bought our first condo the year prior, and I was the primary breadwinner. I was working full-time, and my then husband, he was a grad student, so he only received a small stipend. So I was the primary earner. I was paying the mortgage, I was paying the utilities. I was also an evening law student, a part-time, evening law student. So I was stretched thin. I was exhausted. A year later, we find out we are having our first baby, which is great news. And being the responsible earner that I am, I knew that I wouldn't be getting maternity leave, because at the time they didn't have paid maternity leave. FMLA, if you're not familiar, it only guarantees your job for 3 months. It doesn't force the employer to pay you. I wasn't going to be paid for the 3 months. So I was planning to save. I was basically stacking cash because I knew that even though we had a very stretched thin budget, I, was going to be out on maternity leave for at least 3 months while I was having the baby. I'm going to curl my eyelashes. Okay, so fast forward 9 months later, I am fully pregnant. It is the dead ass heat of the summer. I come home from working, because I'm still working full time up until I have this baby. Come home and I hear my then husband on the phone, and I could tell he was having like a very heated conversation. And so I just stayed quiet and I overheard him, and then I heard him kind of getting teary-eyed and arguing, and he was crying. It turned out he was on the phone with his mom, and I listened to the conversation, and they were asking for money. What I heard from on his end was, "Don't you guys know that Cindy's having a baby soon? We don't have the money." And I just hear him saying over and over, "We don't have the money. Cindy is about to have this baby." And he's like very teary and listening. And then the phone went from his mom to his older sister. Now, she gets on the phone, and I don't really remember what his side of the conversation was, but essentially later he tells me what they all said. Basically, his parents were in the process of downsizing their home. They had literally at one point it was appraised at $1 million. Very affluent neighborhood in the state where we both lived at the time. And they were in the process of downsizing. They were empty nesters, and they wanted to downsize to a less expensive place in a less expensive, lower cost of living state. The problem is they had over leveraged themselves for years. My in-laws were people who, by all accounts, were, I guess, upper middle class. My mother-in-law, ex-mother-in-law, was a doctor. They both were retired. My ex-father-in-law had worked for the government, service, whatever. She was a doctor. Like, you would think that they have all this money ready to go, right? But they didn't. And the problem is, even though they had $1 million home, they had no equity in it. That's because over the 20 or however many years that they lived in the home, they were constantly taking money out, taking out HELOCs, home equity, line of credit, second mortgages, whatever, against the home. And look, do whatever you want with your money. I disagree with taking out HELOCs unless it's, something to do with the house generally. But they were taking money out so that they could finance new cars constantly. And also every time they would take, every other year, they would go on a very, grand vacation trip overseas to visit family for an extended time, and also bring their whole family. So all these trips were constantly being paid for by taking out multiple loans against the home. And the problem when you do that is eventually you will be underwater, which is what they were. They were so overextended on their home and what they owed on the house that even though the house at one point appraised at $1 million, and even though they had a buyer who was willing to pay the amount that they listed it for, the bank for the buyer wouldn't approve the new mortgage amount. And they were short $50,000. They were so cash strapped that they didn't have the $50K to get it to close, and they then were going around and asking everyone in the family, including the kids like us who were expecting kids of their own, because I was 9 months pregnant. We're going around asking everyone if they could borrow thousands of dollars. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I forgot that initial call when I first walked in that day, they weren't even asking straight up for money. They were asking if they could use our excellent credit to open up a line of credit, open up a credit card, so that they could use that line of credit to pay for renovations to the house that needed to be done in order to sell it and to list it. And also, to go back, another reason that they were terrible with money, when my then husband and I were looking to get pre-qualified to, for a mortgage to buy our first home, that was when we found out that his father, because they had the same name, he was the third and his dad was the junior, their grandfather was senior. His father was in the habit of constantly opening up new credit cards, car notes in his son's name. So when we pulled up our credit report to get pre-qualified for our home, my then husband found out that he had terrible credit. His credit score was in the tank. And when they went back and looked at the actual credit lines, like the craziest one was he had a car note in his name from when he was in 10th grade. So we went through so much trouble to like clean it up. They, we made them, I guess, pay off some of the notes. I don't remember what it was, but finally we pre-qualified for this like very modest little house or condo. So they were initially asking if they could open up a credit card in our names, and he was refusing. He was saying, really, I'd really rather not. And then he kept bringing up the baby and that I'm pregnant and we need this money. It was when they got the sister on the phone, because she lived with Oz at the time. They put the sister on the phone and she kept trying to guilt him, her own brother, and saying, well, it's just credit. You're not going to pay for your baby with credit, are you? Which was just such a crazy statement to say. Basically, they were asking for us to open up a credit card. We declined because I don't want to open up new credit. I was very diligent about protecting my credit and my credit score. I had about, at that time, something like $10,000 in my emergency savings, because that was what I needed to sustain us when I was going to be out on maternity leave. Eventually, they wore him down and wore us down and guilted us. They were like, well, we contributed this much to your wedding. We lent them $5,000. Yeah, lent $5,000 on the agreement that they would pay us back within a certain time frame upon closing, because they were like, oh, we're going to get it back at closing and then we'll cut you a check that same day. We're like, okay, these are the terms for repayment. And guess what? You think that they followed those terms? No. And it led to so much drama and eventually a divorce.